priest and said, "Is that so bad? A person should hold to principles like my wife." He always did. He stood there in the middle of the living room when he crashed in. His wife at him and said, "Yes, we do." And he said, "Get it for him." And she went and got it, walked over and handed it to her. He held the thing and he said, "Yes, of course." She said, "I'm a little girl." And in Cairo, the police have been after the circuit overseer for quite a while. They know there is such a man. They do not know his name. They do not know. Now this man, because of the way he treated his wife, became the hero of the church. The priest would get up in the pulpit and hold this man up as an idol and a symbol of the church. This man in his loyalty to the church does not spare his own life. And he preached and idolized this man as a symbol of loyalty to the church. And the man and the priest were just like that. And one day, as it was his habit, this man walked into the priest's study, and while they were talking, he was looking around at the books, and he went over to a big one, and he started to pull it out. And when he reached for it, the priest put his hand up there and says, "You know, on that one, it was a Bible." The man shoved it back, and he turned around, looked at the priest, and he said, "Why?" He said, "It's a sin to read that one." And the priest smiled at him, saying, "Oh, it's not a sin to read that one. But let me tell you, if you should read that book, there's always a possibility that someday you may hold to principles like your wife does, and we would never want that to happen." And the man looked back at the priest and said, "If a man reads that book, he might someday hold to principles like my wife." He looked at the priest and said, "Is that so bad?" The priest said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I'll tell you what I mean. For years I have beaten that woman to unconsciousness. And yet when she regains strength and consciousness and can get up off the floor and walk around and do things, she cooks my food. She takes care of my boy. She cleans my house. She does my laundry. Is it so bad that a person should hold to principles like my wife?" And with that, he turned around and walked out. And he walked home, and he went crashing in the front door like he always did. He stood there in the middle of the living room when he crashed in. His wife came in to see why he was home early and saw him there. And the man bellowed out at his wife, "Have you got a Bible in the house?" Poor woman didn't know what was coming. And she looked back at him and said, "Yes, we do." And he said, "Get it for him." And she went and got it, walked over and handed it to her. He held the thing and he said, "Would you study it with me?" And the woman looked at him and said, "Yes, of course." She said, "It would be better if one of the brothers studied with you, but I'll study with you." And the man said, "If it's better for one of the brothers to study with me, get one of the brothers to study with me." And she called and got one of the brothers. And the man studied and he learned the truth. Today, when they come to meetings, she sits in the Kingdom Hall with her husband beside her and the boy. When they go from house to house, she goes with her husband and the little boy. Can you imagine how that woman thanks God that he gave her the strength to hang on until her husband learned the truth? But that's the point of the verse. God gives the tired one power, and the one that falls, he'll strengthen them. And we appreciate that assurance too. Now, as we mentioned, with young people. It's very foolish for a young person to trust in himself. It's in Psalm 34 that we read the verse. Happy is the able-bodied man who trusts in Jehovah. And young able-bodied people who have got the good brains to trust in Jehovah are the ones who will be strengthened when the pressure's on, just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were. For just a few minutes, let me take you back to Egypt, to the United Arab Republic. As we mentioned there, the work is banned. In Egypt, if I remember correctly, it's Cairo. There's a family in the truth, a mother and a father and a little girl. And in Cairo, the police have been after the circuit overseer for quite a while. They know there is such a man. They do not know his name. They do not know what he looked like. But they're after him and they want him. One day they were pretty sure that the circuit overseer was in town, but they didn't know who he was or where he was. So the police, early one morning, it was about 4 o'clock in the morning, the family was sleeping. Without any warning, the police threw their shoulder against his family's front door and crashed their way in and ended up in the living room. In the living room, there were 2 doors. They took their pick and went crashing into the one. They ended up in the couple's bedroom. And looking at the couple, they were screaming at him, "Where is he? Where is he? Where is he?" The couple were trying to wake up. What was happening? Much less answer any questions. Well, after a little yelling and screaming, they went out of that room and crashing into the other room. And you know what they found there? An empty bed and an open window. They were in the right house, but the wrong room. Now, that's the closest they ever got. But they decided that this family knew something. So they took the husband and the wife and the little 13-year-old girl down to the police station. And I'll tell you, they gave those parents a working over because they wanted to find out who this fellow was. The parents weren't saying anything. And finally, after a long, long day of hard interrogation, one of the police looked at the other and said, "Hey, what about the 13-year-old girl? Maybe that's the answer to our question." So they locked the parents up and went and got the 13-year-old girl. And they started with sweet talk. They said, "Hi, how are you? What's your name?" And she didn't answer. So they plied with some more questions and said, "It's nice to have company, isn't it? Did you have a good time last night? What'd you do? What's his name?" All kinds of questions they peppered her with. They said, "You must be hungry. Want some candy?" They tried everything to get the little girl to talk, but she stood there, looked him right in the eye, and her lips were squeezed closed. The reason why, when she was a little girl, she remembered a verse her daddy had read her. The way she remembered it is, when you are before the wicked one, you keep your lips sealed. And to her, that's what it meant. She wasn't opening them for candy or anything. She wasn't opening them to answer questions. And finally, the police got about worn out and they started to yell at her. And they said, "Look, there's no sense fooling around anymore." And they used a tough treatment at her. And they yelled at her and they said, "You see that door over there? You know what's behind that door? Behind that door there's a room filled with rats and snakes. Now, young lady, either you answer our question, or we're going to put you in that room with the rats and the snakes, and they're going to eat you and kill you." And about that time, the little girl snickered. And she couldn't hold it anymore, and she laughed. Then the police were furious. And they said, "What's so funny?" And she said, "Rats and snakes. Jehovah closed the mouths of lions for Daniel, and they're a whole lot bigger than rats and snakes. He won't have any trouble with them. Well, that's interesting what Jehovah can do for those that put their trust in him. Now, you may not find yourself in a situation like that. You may be a young person that goes to school in this area. But the way you conduct yourself in school can do a lot of good for other people. A letter came into the Society's office some time ago about a 10-year-old boy. Now, this is not a spectacular experience, but it shows what you can do by being a good Christian. It tells about Paul, who was 10 years old. He's in grade school, and his teacher allows for no one to drift out of line. But one day the teacher stopped in the middle of class when things were not going just right. And he started to interrogate Paul. And he asked him how many religious meetings he went to a week, where they were, how long it took to travel to them, how long he stayed at the meetings, when he studied at home. And when he got the information, he began to figure it on the blackboard. From home to the meetings and back, time studied. And when he got it all figured up on the blackboard, he called the class to attention, and he said, look, Paul spends 14 hours a week devoted to religious activity, and he still gets his homework prepared. His point was made that the class had an additional 14 hours a week free time, and the teacher told them, look, either you devote more effort to the school or you join Paul's religion, one of the two. And the interesting result was that Paul got 3 Bible studies out of it with his classmates. So things do work in an interesting way. It doesn't have to be great and spectacular. But if you trust Jehovah, do what your parents say. Do what the teacher says. Be obedient like Jehovah says. Your course of action will be observed. It will be an honor to Jehovah, and Jehovah will help you when there's difficulty. Just to tell you one other story. Some of you may be getting up in years, and down here in this part of the country in Georgia, there is a dear sister who today is 78 years old. She's been in the truth a number of years. She started to pioneer when she was 67. That was 11 years ago. She's been a pioneer that long. Now, you know, pioneers are required to spend at least 1,200 hours a month in the field service. This sister's report at the end of the year run 1,450 hours, 1,400. One year when she wasn't making out so good physically, she spent 1,300 hours in the field service. Last February, when she turned in her field service report, February, the shortest month of the year when weather is often inclement. You know what her field service report was for February? 287 hours, 349 magazines, 147 return visits, and 11 Bible studies. The presiding overseer saw that report and he shook his head. And he went back to the sister and he handed her the report and said, Sister, look at the report again, will you? Those numbers are kind of high. Are those numbers right? She pulled out her record and she added them up again. She looked at the card, each one very carefully. She gave it back to the brother and said, Brother, those figures are right. She says, you spent a lot of time in the field service in February. And she smiled. And she said, Brother, let me tell you, ever since I was a little girl, I was forced to work bent double 12 hours a day in a cotton field. I've done that all my life. Now I'm older. I don't have to work 12 hours a day in a cotton field. But I thank God I still have some strength and can spend that kind of time in His service. Isn't that a nice expression from a woman who obviously loves God?
That's a camcorder.